Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It's my joy to have Veronica Swift with me again, and we're going to be looking at some interesting things. And why don't you just take a minute, Veronica, and share a little bit how people can connect with you?
Hi, Adina. It's great to be with you again on this little bit of a wild ride we're on here.
Yep.
I write a blog. It's at veronicaswift.blog. And I've been writing there since January of 2021, and I have been interested in the brotherhood, the occult, the group, whatever you want to call it, that seems to own the worldwide evil since about October. It was the first time I was introduced to it was in October of 2020. And it seemed to explain to me just why the world is as crazy as it is. And I've been looking into it ever since. And the more I look into it, the more it just really fits with all the weird things that happen in the world. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you can find about 350 articles on my website. And I'm also reluctantly on Twitter, X, and I have my own locals group that's a little calmer than Twitter is at veronicaswift.locals.com. So you can find me in all those different places should you be interested in learning something about this without having spent as much time as I have spent on it. So that's one of my goals, is that I can't imagine every single person in the universe having to learn all the stuff from scratch, because there's so much of it and it's so complicated and it's in such bits and pieces everywhere. Each survivor knows a little bit about a lot of things, and putting it together is what really gives me the big picture and the ability to understand kind of what's going on. So that's sort of what I do, is I take bits and pieces from survivors who have been speaking out for decades or years or just recently, and I try to correlate them together so that there's more than one perspective or point of view on a specific subject. And that helps me understand the big picture.
Yeah.
And then other people too, who actually, have full-time jobs and have to work and don't have 12 hours a day to scratch their head and try to piece this stuff together.
Mm-hmm. I so appreciate your research. I found it invaluable. Again, there's a lot of podcasts and stories of survivors, but a lot of us don't have the time to listen to all of them. And so the way you condense things is really helpful. And so I'm grateful for that.
I'm glad you and others have gotten things out of it. I don't really think I would be still doing this had it not been valuable for survivors. I think I probably would have said, okay, I understand enough. I'm good. I think I've got the big picture. But the fact that a lot of survivors have told me that they do find it valuable because they can piece together more of their own story from finding the bits in other people's stories. And the second part of that is, if I hadn't gotten so much harassment. So I have to actually say thank you to all the people who have mercilessly tried to chop me to bits and pieces, because you have just made me more dogged than I ever would have been. I would have not continued, but they made me feel like this is more important to do than not to do. Yeah.
So grateful. And as a survivor, it really helps to kind of normalize some of this, in the sense of when memories are surfacing, you think you're going crazy and you think, man, I'm the only one.
Yeah.
But then when you begin to see and read and so on, it's like, oh, okay. All right. I can see, begin to get that bigger picture look, and it helps on the journey instead of just feeling isolated and alone and crazy. And
Yeah.
very grateful.
I think that's what they want. From an outside perspective, it seems to be what they want everyone to feel. They want you to feel disconnected from not the experience that you're experiencing. So they do that a lot with drugs, it seems to me. In fact, just yesterday I was listening to a bit from I think he's a former UK detective, and he was talking about the Madeleine McCann case, except he was talking about a different scenario than the night that Madeleine passed. And he was saying that, her parents went to this it sounded to me like a a ritual orgy. He kind of put it off as a swinging party, but in my head I thought this sounds a little bit more like a ritual situation.
Yeah.
And they drugged all the kids. They dragged all the kids there, and then they drugged all the kids, and that just makes you really fuzzy about an event if you can remember it at all. So I think that's where a lot of the craziness comes in. They do that kind of stuff. And then you can't hardly remember what you've been through, but you've been through something, and your body remembers. The body keeps the score. So you do feel crazy when your body and your mind are out of sync like that. Luckily, there are a lot of people who do remember. So I like getting those stories because they're pretty clear about things, and they can put a lot of people's bits and pieces into focus.
Yeah. So good. And so we were just talking briefly before we started about where we were going today. And if you all remember, a month or two ago, we did some deep dives into the jesusstrand and genealogy and all of that. And Veronica was so gracious to offer to do some work for anybody who contacted her. And I think she got kind of overwhelmed. A lot of you did that. But we thought we'd kind of do a follow-up and kind of see what kind of the results are in a general way of that, and anything that you learned from it, Veronica.
Yeah, so this has been it's a little bit of a wild ride. I didn't anticipate seeing what I have seen in the database, especially since I had a number of people contact me and say, hey, I'm wondering what you find in my background, because I've got no connection to the occult that I know of at all in anywhere in my family. So I had a couple of cases that were nice to look at, because they were sort of like my control group.
Yeah.
And then I had people who had I did a number of famous individuals who I thought might be connected, but wasn't sure. And then I did famous individuals that we knew darn well were connected, because they've been outed by, every survivor on the planet pretty much. And then I did a bunch of other people who, I don't know, and they just were random people who requested. And so here's the overview is there's two stories, right? There's the story that Jesus was not married, and he was single, and he was a teacher, and he kind of lived more of a monastic lifestyle, in that he never got married and he didn't have children, and he was kind of a someone who was responsible for the teaching of the masses. That's one story. And then we have the occult story, which is that Jesus got married. And actually, there's a couple of different occult stories about Jesus. One is that he got married many times. He was a polygamist. That's sort of that's the Mormon Church's background on Jesus Christ. And not only that, but a number of their progenitors, or their original apostles or bishops, or I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what they're called. The Joseph Smith and his first set of presidents of the church after him, they were all descended from one or more of Jesus's supposed wives. So that's the kind of the origin story for the Mormon Church on that front. And then there's stories, there's other occult stories that there were multiple Jesuses, and sort of the stories that we're all getting are sort of an amalgamation of the life of Jesus. And then there is a story that there was an original Jesus that failed in his whatever his mission was on earth, and got replaced by a new Jesus. So they call him Jesus 9 and Jesus 12. So there's a lot of stories out there about Jesus. And then you have the kind of the researchers like Lee Bagnier in Lincoln, who did their Holy Blood, Holy Grail book. They've got a different story about Jesus, but most of the modern day books that are written say Jesus was married to one woman and they had multiple children. And from that, there's a couple of different ways to go. So the occult story about Jesus is that he had 4 children, and that because he was, in the occult story, he was an occult priest and his wife was an occult priestess, and there were rules about when they could get married and when they could have relations with one another, and how many times a year or not they could, and how spaced out the children were supposed to be. And so the occult writers tend to say this is, we know he was an occultist because the pattern of his children follows after the occult high priestess and high priest rules for that day. So the generally accepted story in the occult is that he had 3 boys and 1 girl. And the 3 boys, so if you read Gary Wayne's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, he names the 3 boys, and he mentions the girl but doesn't name the girl. But if you go on the Mormon Church's genealogy website, familysearch.com, they name the girl but not the boys, really. So if you look at Jesus and Mary Magdalene's profile, each person has their own individual profile. They're alternately listed as having no boys, and right now I looked this morning and they've got 1 boy listed and a girl. But the girl is the one with the lineage, right? Mm-hmm. If you listen to what Jessie Zvotor has said recently on other programs about the Jesus strand, she may have even said it on yours. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly which one she did. She said that the Brotherhood's story of the lineage from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the important lineage is the female lineage. Mm-hmm. So from daughter to daughter to daughter to daughter, this is where theoretically the Brotherhood is going to get its Antichrist candidate. Mm-hmm. If you look on the Family Search website, they have all this Jesus and Mary Magdalene stuff, and they have the first daughter, they name her Sarah Tamar. But after that, they have no females listed at all. So the legend, the lore, the myth, right, is in the Brotherhood database, but the important lineage for the Brotherhood is completely missing. And all you have are the male lineages. Huh. So if in all the probably 50 people I've done lookups on, it takes between 1 and 2 hours to do a lookup on somebody based on how much time it takes me to get started and how many branches they have. Mm-hmm. There is almost nobody, famous, partially famous, in the Brotherhood for sure, not knowing, control group, doesn't seem to matter. There's almost nobody that doesn't trace back in the Family Search database to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. I have only found 3. So this excludes the people that I couldn't find the parents on, so I couldn't do the research on. But for those that I knew the parents and couldn't go back in the lineage, I've only found 3 of probably 50 that I couldn't trace back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the Family Search database. That's crazy. Which is astonishing, right? So it's not just widespread. Whatever they've got going in this database isn't just widespread. It's like enormous, absolutely enormous. The appearance of it to me is that they want to connect virtually everybody on the planet back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which is such a big idea right at the moment. I can't really figure out why they'd want to do that. Yeah. Because that is a lot of work. That's 40 to 50 generations for almost everybody on the planet. And that's hard for me to imagine.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that's been a result that I did not anticipate at all. Then I came across this quote from a gentleman who does genetic research, and this was out of I guess they did an actual study on something going back, way back to progenitor humans. And he talked, it was an article in a really prominent science journal, which science is kind of weird these days because so many scientists are paid off and they lie, and it's kind of not, but I'd say this particular journal probably still has a little bit of a reputation left. this guy who's the author of a book called Mapping Human History, Genes, Race, and Our Common Origins, he said that statistically, if anybody, quote, if anybody living today is descended from Jesus, so are most of us on the planet. That was his conclusion. So just out of statistics alone, he thinks you can map people back to, for example, Noah or Adam and Eve or Jesus or an early generation human being on the planet to almost everybody.
Wow.
So that's another thing that I didn't anticipate is okay. So if they've got this myth established firmly in the Family Search database, there's got to be a reason for it. And there's got to be a reason why they want to tie almost every human being on planet Earth to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And I have a couple of thoughts, but I'm curious what you think about that. Just aside from being a little mind blown, right?
It's very, very interesting. And I want to put a caveat here that Veronica and I do not believe that Jesus had
Right.
children. I just want to make that very, very clear. We do believe in the Bible, and that this is, the occult story. I just want to be sure that's out there. So we're not taken out of context and posted somewhere that we're
right.
But I am very surprised at that. And, I guess part of that could be, tying it into the Antichrist and how we're all one, and all of those kinds of things. But yeah, that's a mystery to me. I am surprised. That is very interesting.
Now, of all the people that I was not able to trace back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, one of them was Queen Elizabeth II, who has just, I mean, her ancestry went back to Cain and Lilith, of all people, right? So the original progenitor occult story is that Adam had a first wife who was a demoness named Lilith, who also has 100 other names, including the Queen of Heaven, etc. It's who occultists believe that, and don't shoot the messenger now here, people. If you're Catholic, the Queen of Heaven is who the statues of Mary are modeled after in the Catholic Church, is the demon Lilith, and her supposed son / however they do that, I don't know. It just is. That's another whole ball of wax. But in the Family Search database, I have also found Lilith and her supposed offspring, who include not only Cain but other female. I guess, I don't know. If you're the daughter of a demoness, are you a demoness also? I don't really know. So, yeah. And there's a whole occult mythology around that as well. In fact, there are two primary stories around that. So it's not just the Jesus strand. It also goes back to the Genesis, the origin story, the Adam and Eve story. And I, in doing all this and kind of backtracking and going on a lot of tangents, I found a passage in an old, I don't know if it was a talk he did at a church, I think, by John Todd. And he talked about the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon, which I had heard of before, but had no idea really what it was. He says it's a book that there are 3 copies of, and it's made out to be, again, a myth. It's made out to be a myth in the popular culture, and it was written about by H.P. Lovecraft, and who's a horror story writer, essentially. But John Todd says that the Necronomicon is a really important witchcraft book in the Brotherhood. And other people have noted that it's a living book, which means that certain people can get certain things to show up in it when they, in particular, hold it. If you've ever seen the series about the 3 young witches, Charmed, gosh, I don't know if that was a 90s series, 80s, 90s, 2000. I don't know. It's a while ago, many decades ago. One of their stars, Shannon Doherty, who also starred on Beverly Hills 90210 and a lot of those popular 80s and 90s shows. She recently passed away. But there was a series called Charmed where 3 witches had a book of shadows. They had their own charm book, spell book, and things would appear on the page when individuals would read it, which to me is a nod to a living book or something like that. So this Necronomicon apparently has in it the origin story from the occult perspective. So we not only have a Jesus Bible story counterpart with a Jesus occult story, we also have an Adam and Eve Bible story with a counterpart of a Necronomicon origin story. And according to John Todd, the Necronomicon account talks about how the original aliens came to Earth in their flying saucers. So this stuff gets complicated and weird. Yeah. Some people, now, the thing about genealogy is that it's supposed to be document based, right? You're supposed to be able to produce documents that were originated for individuals, whether that's a notation of family Bible or an actual birth certificate or whatnot. You're supposed to be able to produce these documents to document that you go back to these ancestors. And then you've got the genetic genealogy, which you can only really document back so far with that because it gets diluted when you get to like the 4th or 5th great grandparent, and there's not much you can do past that ancestrally. But those documents only go back so far. So where are the documents that go back to the Jesus strand? Who's producing these? Are they being, the Brotherhood says that they have kept them and held them. There's other stories that say that these documents around the time of Jesus were all destroyed because nobody wanted anybody to know what his ancestry was or what his parentage was or what happened to him. Other stories say that some people had personal copies of them, and they've been handed down from family to family over the past 2,000 years or so. It gets really weird and really interesting to look into it. So what's real and what isn't? And I can tell you, the other things that don't seem to be real in the family search database will knock your socks off. So there are entries, and if you look at other databases, just as a comparison, they will say, this is a fictitious person or a mythological person. They'll just say, this isn't real. There's an entry here, but this isn't real. Family search database doesn't say that. They don't say these are fictitious people. They just say this is the ancestor. This is the parent of so-and-so. So if you go back, for example, if I go back, I did, what's the famous Billy Graham. So if you go back in Billy Graham or Franklin Graham's ancestry, you get the Jesus strand. So you get them connected back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. You also get them connected back to the Norse god Odin. And you also get them connected back to Aphrodite.
Wow.
Because Aphrodite is listed as the father of a particular individual in Troy, who then seems to father an entire Roman series of leaders, down to when the Romans intermarried with other people in different areas. And then you plop together a few, like a Roman with an Egyptian, and then they wind up in Ireland. And if you look further into their history, then they become the leaders of tribes in Ireland.
Wow.
So there's a lot of really odd stuff. Aphrodite, Primo, Hecuba, Zeus. We found Zeus. Zeus is apparently another name for Noah. I did not know that. So they use Jupiter and Zeus and Noah as interchangeable. Oceanus is also another alternate name for Noah. I have found Uranus. I found Gaia. Hyperion, Kronos, Tethys, all of these, what we would call mythological beings. There are so many of these in the Family Search database. You can't, it's hard to find them all, but it's hard to imagine that anybody's putting these in as actual parentage of anyone. We think of them as mythological. The Brotherhood thinks of them as ancestry. I think they think of them as ancestry. I think what this is telling me is that the marriage of the gods to the women of Earth, they actually feel is documentable and worth putting in a genealogy database.
It's so interesting because with scripture, we would agree that, there was that intermarriage and definitely hybrids. But it's just curious that the cult would want to document that and why.
Right. One of the proposals has been that there are contracts with gods or contracts with demigods, which would classify Zeus or Odin or whatnot, and that this database is trying to map out not the ancestry, but the contracts.
Yes.
So I don't know if you know anything about contracts within the system. It seems to be kind of a big thing, but new to me because it hasn't been talked about much.
Yeah.
But it kind of makes sense that if there are contracts with gods or demigods, and you can't really go back documentably in your own ancestor or anybody else's very far, but they're going to rely on whatever internal documentation they have that shows these contracts.
Yes. And I have run across that in some of the memories that have come up, where I was contracted in different places. And, I don't have specifics yet, but just that was coming up. So
yesterday I was I decided I was going to go back and listen to the 8 or 9 or 10 or however many long form interviews that Dan Duvall did with Robert Van Dries Mitchell, who was also pretty high up in the system. And I just happened in the second or third video that he did, came across him talking about the many, many, many marriages he had to different Egyptian gods.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that these marriages are part contract.
That would make sense. That would make the most sense, I think, actually.
Yeah.
That resonates.
And that these, finding these in the database is a contract with maybe the familial lineage for a particular bloodline in the Brotherhood.
Wow.
The second interesting part of this, which is kind of the corollary to the Jesus strand, is that virtually everybody I've looked at also goes back to the Norse god Odin. And Odin's also known as Woden, Wooden, or Wodin. And I guess originally it was a Germanic demigod that sort of became adopted by the Scandinavian countries as well, under the name Odin, Odin. But that seems to be a gigantic contract also with Brotherhood families. And also, maybe they're trying, I don't know, I'm just going to put it out there that maybe they are trying to contract for us, for everybody, even if we aren't lineage. Maybe they're trying to contract with these gods for all the people they've connected them to in this database.
Wow. Now, have you been able to compare these results on the family search with ancestry.com or any other?
Yeah, well, other databases won't they won't have any of this. They will not let you insert a mythological being in an ancestry. They will mark it as a fictitious person. So they have a standard that at least, you can't say Zeus is my 25th great grandfather.
Yeah.
And you can't say that, Lilith is your 32nd great grandmother. So they're not going to let you link to a demon or to a mythological being. Ancestry is a little bit of a different presentation because it's so individual focused. So you have your own tree and you can link to other people's trees, but it's not as easy. They really do limit it to what you can document.
Okay.
So unless there's a hidden side to ancestry that I don't know anything about, you really are forced to focus on your own family and your own family only. And as far back as there are documents for. So Family Search is the only database I've ever seen that lets anybody in the world create an account and put anybody in as anybody's parent, and they're not really doing much about it. The most I've seen them do is mark an individual's profile, like Mary Magdalene's profile just got marked in the past month, I'd say, as being a person who has had, quote, significant research done on her. So kindly try not to change everything about it because everything keeps changing. So a lot of people will go in and they'll change everything. They'll change the kids, they'll change the parents, they'll merge them if there's two records, because you and anybody else in the world can enter any record you want into this database.
Wow, that seems
so. It's it's a very free form. It's very, very free form, and there's not a whole lot of interference that or oversight that goes on. That said, a lot of people who do genealogy are very, very, very picky. They're not going to let people do whatever they want with their particular ancestors or their family unit. So if someone goes in and tries to change it into something really wild, they have the opportunity to revert that change back to the original. And a lot of people do that. They'll revert it back to the original. They'll make a notation. Please do not change this. I have X documentation. You can see that linked in the sources, such and such. There's no verification provided for the change that you've made. So you'll see those kinds of notes because they have a running list of the changes to any individual. You look at Mary Magdalene, it goes on for like 35 pages of changes that people have made without any real interference or oversight from the Family Search, heads or organization heads within the church. So it's a different format than Ancestry, and it's a different format than like GeneTree or WikiTree or a lot of the other places that you would look. So it gives and most of the people, finding this to start with was kind of a weird accident by Thorny Justice, the blogger who writes for my blog as a guest blogger. So she's not a genealogist and doesn't know much about it, but she started looking into it and just thought, well, I'm just going to click back and see how far I can go. I don't know how far I can go. How far can I go back in this? Where does it start? That was something in 20 years of using this particular program I have never thought to do. Never would have occurred to me to click back to Adam and Eve or God. Because, in my rational mind, you can't click back to Adam and Eve and God because there's no documentation for those people. So you're not going to be able to go back that far. So it is a unique situation. And given the unique perspective of the Mormon Church, it's occult or brotherhood origins, the tenets that it's based on, the rituals that are so Masonic focused and oriented. They're built on, the temple rituals are built on Masonic rituals, many of them. It's an occult organization with just a massive sparkle on the outside. Nobody would really be able to. They're so insular as well. It's hard to see inside the organization. So people like Asia Rain and Jesse Zagoda, who have exposed the underbelly of the Mormon Church, really let the rest of us know, hey, this is what they're really into. And I can see it in the Aphrodites and the Odins and the offspring of Jesus and Mary Magdalene in in the database. Yeah.
Wow. 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 That is very, very, very fascinating. And so, those of us who have had this done, um, I'm just kind of wondering what kind of, if it is contract based, then we can ask, for the blood of Jesus to come and break those covenants. We don't have to stay in those contracts with those
Yeah.
beings.
I think that's the usefulness of this.
Yeah.
So, in seeing if it is contracts, and I'd be willing to bet that that's part of it, if not
Mhm.
all of it, then um, these people, I'd really like to insert a bigger word there, but these people who have contracted us on behalf of an occult god or an occult contract of whatever it is that they're not telling us what it is,
Mhm.
we deserve the right to disengage from that, to cut those ties. They may link it in the database, but that doesn't mean we can't detach from it
Yes.
in the spirit world.
Yes.
And I think that's valuable. And there are some people who have contacted me that I've given them a list of 30 or 40 different odd entities, connections in their background. And I've had not too much feedback, but a little bit of feedback that they're finding these things in their ancestry a little bit wild, and they're
Mhm.
finding the detaching that they're doing to be really beneficial.
Yeah. That is
So
awesome.
that's what I find. That's what I find. Um, I find personal testimony about what is making a difference in
Mhm.
your life or someone else's life or my life. I like to see the product of it. So if they say, I'm finding a benefit for myself in my life from detaching from these entities, then I think it's real.
Yeah. That's good. That's kind of interesting because, what our kind of hypothesis in the beginning was, connection to the cult system and all of that. And so people who aren't survivors and they still found those connections, what do you think that indicates? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I, I'm I can hypothesize, and this is a wild guess on my part, based on a bit of information that I heard from someone I can't remember at the moment, but which might come to me pretty soon. Um, there's something called the seed of Cain,
Hmm.
and there's something else called the seed of righteousness. And these are concepts or groups or divisions that are made within the occult, where they take children and, depending upon what ancestry they have determined for these children,
Hmm.
they will put them into the category of being a seed of Cain or being a seed of righteousness.
Hmm.
I believe that the occult keeps better records and different records than anything we have on the surface. I believe
Yeah.
their records are underground, they're in secret, they're probably more accurate than anything we've got here,
Mhm.
So based on that information, the seed of Cain would be anyone who could take their ancestry back to Cain, son of
Mhm.
Adam and Eve, or Adam and Lilith, whichever one they're putting forth in their idea. And then the seed of righteousness really hasn't been elaborated upon much, but I would guess that those are other individuals from a different lineage or different ancestry, maybe even a Jesus and Mary Magdalene lineage. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Yeah.
The goal of the occult for a long time has been to eliminate certain lineages. So, for example, World War II gathered up Jewish people, and they killed the Jewish people of certain lineages
Hmm.
that went back to certain tribes, that went back genealogically in certain ways. And then they left other Jews alive that did not have those lineages, right?
Interesting.
The idea of the Georgia Guidestones is that 500,000 people will be left on Earth after the Great Purge, or what Catherine Austin Fitts calls the Great Poisoning,
Mhm.
In where, they're going to try to get rid of people who have genetics that they don't want left around on Earth, which is
Mhm.
basically anything that isn't the occult, the prized occult lineages.
Yeah.
I've also seen some information recently from a variety of places that indicates that they've had the ability to do genetic testing on people for a lot longer than we think. And
Mhm.
that this goes back pre-World War II. And they did a lot of this genetic testing during World War II. And now the occult has essentially acquired all of the ancestry DNA testing,
Mhm.
and it's acquired all of like the 23andMe, uh, giant big names in the occult own those companies now.
Yeah.
And there are people who believe that they're using those companies as a means to weed out those that they want to be kept alive or don't want to be kept alive based on your genetics.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
It's
I
craziness.
I know for a fact that they have the ability to. Uh, this came out a couple of years ago when all of the biotechnology companies, there were companies like government organizations. The U.S. had 20 or 30 different biotech firms in the Ukraine and Taiwan and all these places all around the world, South America, you name it. And they were building bioweapons, but a lot of them are race based bioweapons. So they can kill an entire group of people with certain biomarkers based on their genetics, racial genetics. They can also do targeted bioweapons. So they can take an individual's DNA profile, make a targeted bioweapon, and kill someone like
Mhm.
that. So they've got the ability to do this, and they've been working on it in stealth for a very long time, is my guess.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you've read Swally's latest book. I think it's in that one that where she talks about though they have that ability, um, God doesn't allow them to do it, and
Yeah,
how
yeah,
frustrated they are, in that process because they definitely would have eliminated, you know, a whole lot more people if they could have, if God had permitted it.
yep.
So,
I think God. I've heard a lot of God has not permitted this and that and the other to happen from a variety of different folks.
yeah.
Um, yeah, from everything from nuclear attack getting undone and reversed to bioweapons not working. And that's the thing about the occult, right? Is that they have all these plans and they work so very, very hard on them.
Mhm.
And God just kind of thinks about lifting his little finger, but doesn't really. And it all just goes to pot for them. And
Yeah.
that's the fascinating part. It can be terrifying looking in at it from the outside, thinking, oh, they've got all these capabilities and they're
Mhm.
doing all this stuff. And yet, how many years it must have taken them at least 5 or 10 years to get all this information in the family search database
Mhm.
that we then can spend 30 seconds in prayer disconnecting ourselves from. So 10 years, 30 seconds. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. I get a sense for who's the more powerful in all of it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the message we wanna make sure that people hear is that, although the system tries all of these things and, on the surface looks very powerful, in controlling the world, ultimately, God is the one who is in control,
Mhm.
and his plans will prevail, and that's the glory, that's where we get to rest. Our faith and our trust is in him alone, and, we don't have to be afraid of these things. I think as we expose them and bring them into the light, it helps take away the power, um, that it can have, and so that's the joy.
For me, I'm getting heat now. People have started, I'm always, it's fascinating to me what people accuse me of because I'm like, you have no idea. I take a look at that and I'm like, okay, this is a big thing for them. This is what they're afraid of. So then I can take that and use that to my advantage. But the big thing I'm getting right now is, Veronica wants to be the world expert on the brotherhood. Well, okay, that must scare them a little bit, number one. It's a good thing to know. But it's not that I want to be the world expert on the brotherhood. It's that by understanding, it makes me calm. I get so much peace from understanding this stuff. I get so much, I just get settled. I feel so much better when I know what's going on. Whether they're able to do what they want to do or not do what they want to do, or whether they're powerful or not powerful, just plain knowing it's there. Because otherwise, you're looking at a behemoth that has no face, it has no name, it has no structure, it just seems to pop up and whack you every once in a while. And for me, that was the frustrating thing. Is that the reason I'm looking into this is not so that I can be a world expert on anything.
Yeah.
The reason is because I think that the occult, the brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, scares people because what they do is so hidden. It's so dark, it's such a mystery, and it appears on earth. It appears in the public, and you're like, where did that come from? I don't understand this. And for me, for a long time, that became frightening. Like I think the world is going absolutely nuts, but no, it's not the world is going nuts. It's that there's an underlying layer of individuals who push things into the public consciousness. They push ideas, they push concepts, they push religious, flags, and they beat on people who have different ideas. And that was not a comfortable place for me to be. And understanding what they do, understanding their structure, the people that are in it, the concepts, the real world applications. And also then once you understand those things, you can understand the spiritual strategies to undo what they are trying to do. So those two things together, understanding what they are, who they are, what they're doing, how they're accomplishing what they're doing, gives me a lot of peace.
Yes.
So much peace of mind. Not because I love learning about it. It's because I love that feeling of peace when I have understanding about what's going on.
Yeah.
And then when you have real good understanding, then you can't pray against something you know nothing about.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's the state they want to keep us in. They want to keep us in bondage, whether it's through a contract to a demon god or demigod or Titans or Hercules or Zeus or whatever, they've got inserted into our ancestry on a site with contracts like Family Search, if that's the case, what's going on there. But if I know that, and I know the individual entities that they're trying to connect me with, or if someone, who I do these lookups for, know that those are the entities that they are trying to connect in their background, and we can spend time praying those dissolved, cut, however you want to do that. That is so powerful, and it's so rewarding.
Yes.
It's like, man, you are not in a powerless position. You are not subject to the king of the occult, right? You are your own sovereign individual under the headship of God and Jesus Christ, and you can pray and dissolve those ties if you've got them. So it's a peace of mind and a position of power in the authority that we've been given as human beings. So not that I want to be an authority, but that it's important that we know, because we do something about it.
Yes. And I totally agree. And I've had some of those accusations come at me too. It's like, oh, you're just digging up, focusing on the darkness, and, the kind of what you focus on multiplies and things like that. Just look at the light,
Right.
And I think it is a way to detract from, what God wants us to do. At the same time, I would say that I don't encourage anybody to look into this stuff from a fear perspective or from a not well grounded in the Lord, because it can lead you astray, and you can go down dark roads. And so that is a a caution out there is that know that this is something that God has called you to, and that, whatever you're researching is covered in the blood of Jesus, and,
Mhm.
that we walk in that anointing, not, getting
Oh yeah.
fascinated by, darkness and all of that, but understanding, as you said, our authority and our power to bring the system down. And that to me is the joy. I was just telling a group last night that I lead that, that's to me, getting healed or getting fixed isn't the goal for me with my groups or for myself, but it's walking with God and partnering with him in the triumph over evil,
Yeah.
and that I get to participate in bringing this system down. And
Yeah.
that brings me great joy. To me, that's the greatest vengeance that we can have. I don't like to use the word vengeance, and I'm not talking about the, get in there and beat them all
Yeah.
up
Right.
type of
No.
thing, because I think that's, God's job. But we get to partner with him in bringing the system down. And I just think that's incredible victory.
We have a voice. We have a almost a mandated voice. Isaiah 54:17 says that we have God's permission to condemn every tongue that rises against us in judgment. And that we have power to, Luke 10:19 says we have power to tread all over the power of the enemy. So we have his permission to talk about it,
Mhm.
and it's almost mandated.
Yeah.
We should be talking back against those things that come against God.
Yeah.
And we should be treading on the enemy because we have the authority to do that.
Yeah.
So knowing that, and knowing that they are not all powerful, they are not all they're cracked up to be, or all that they've built themselves up in their mind to be, that's also a benefit in a spiritual sense, but also in a physical sense, because
Mhm.
if you can feel that authority in your own body, then you can act upon it. And if you can act upon it, it's powerful here on earth. It's powerful in the spirit realm. It makes your prayers more powerful. It makes you can stand or sit or whatever you're doing in yourself more easily. And that's what the occult tries to do, is to take you away from your body. They try to
Yes.
take you out of your body. They try to scare you out of or torture you out of your body. They don't want you living in the temple that you are,
Mhm.
under the authority of God, with the authority you have as his child. So
Yeah,
taking it back is critical, in my opinion.
definitely. And it's interesting to me, that so many counterfeits that they have that are so, in a lot of ways, close to what the real is. And if you aren't aware,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy to be seduced into the deception. And so even like you were referencing earlier, the seed of Cain and the righteous seed, is that, you have that in Genesis, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like Gary Wayne's book, Genesis Conspiracy, that traces so well the differences between the two. And, it's important that we know this stuff. It's important that we understand the counterfeit. Not that we focus exclusively on the counterfeit, but so that
No.
we can clearly see the true and not, be drawn into deception.
Yeah, it's a pathway through. It's a pathway through to the reality. You can look at the counterfeit and say, wow, that's seductive. Wow, that's really, I mean, they have it set up so it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But the reality is the reality of it isn't as seductive. It isn't as clear cut, but it's much more powerful. So if you've
Yes.
got that path where everything is so perfectly laid out, you're probably not looking at God, because God just does not do that. His roller coaster's a little bumpier than that. But yeah, it's very seductive. I've read through some of these stories, and I'm like, wow, that really makes sense. And I have to mind check and say that's exactly what they're doing to so many people, is they are seducing you into believing this because it makes so much sense, but
Yeah.
it's not real.
Yeah. and they have many, many different pathways that they take to do that. The alien story that we were all created by the aliens, and all those kinds of things, and they try to tie it into the Bible and try to make it make sense. But I believe we can be grounded in the truth of who the true Lord Jesus is, what his plans and purposes are, and keep to that plumb line.
Exactly. If we do, they don't have much of a chance.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Anything more you want to add for today?
Just that if anybody else is interested in having me do lookups, I will still do them. They are taking me a lot longer than they were in the beginning because I'm having to fit them in around a bunch of other stuff that's come up in my life. It takes me probably a couple of weeks to get through that, but you can always email me through the contact link on my blog and get a hold of me. And, to be quite honest, if you would like to do it yourself, I'm also amenable to meeting up with people and kind of walking you through. It's kind of a 10-minute walkthrough, and then you can hunt for those for yourself. And some people do like to see it themselves. So I've also done that. And so either which way, but it's useful, I think, in knowing if you're interested in detaching yourself from any of these potential contracts that they've got you hoodwinked under without you even knowing. So I'm still willing to do that. I encourage everybody to also, if you have the ways and the means to sign up for my blog, it's $27 for a year's worth of access, plus all the back blogs. So you could spend a couple of weeks catching up on some of the history in the occult. If you're new to this, it's kind of useful because otherwise you're going to spend a long time looking at a lot of resources to try to figure out what has led us up to this point of understanding. So yeah, want to do that, or give me a holler, and I'm always available for questions. I like talking to people and love talking to you, Adina. It's always interesting what we come up with.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. And just so appreciate your generosity and opening that up for people. That's amazing. And for those of you who are listening, I just encourage you to stick close to true Jesus. He is worth it all, and he is where the true power is. And encourage you to subscribe, pass this along. Let's spread the word about the power of true Jesus in our lives to overcome every system of the enemy. And that's why we're here on Testimony Mountain. And so we'll see you next time. Take care.